Check this out, 1972, Watergate, one of the biggest political scandals in American history. In 1972, some political operatives broke into the DNC headquarters in Washington, D.C., and the Nixon administration covered it up. And one of the chief architects of that cover-up, his name was Chuck Colson, he was convicted and he was sent to prison. But here's the thing. While he sat in prison, he realized that dealing with the fallout of his actions was not a viable way if he continued to excuse them. And so in the 1970s, when he got out of prison, he apologized for his actions. In other words, he repented of his sin, and he became a follower of Jesus Christ. Here's another one. In the mid-60s, the middle of the civil rights movement, the governor of Alabama, George Wallace, he stood up at his inaugural address, and he said, segregation today, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever. Friends, if there was a face for racism in the United States at that time, it was George Wallace. And yet, here's the thing. About 10 years later, in the middle of the 1970s, George Wallace realized that he could not continue to deal with the fallout of his actions by excusing them. And so in the late 1970s, George Wallace, he apologized to the black community, he repented of his sin, and he became a follower of Jesus Christ. Here's another. 1969, a young woman named Norma McCorvey, she got pregnant, she went home to Texas, and she tried to have an abortion, but she was denied. And so she gathered some lawyers together. They brought a case against the district attorney. His name was Henry Wade. And to help protect her identity, they referred to her as Jane Roe. And in 1973, the case Roe versus Wade came before the Supreme Court, and the court ruled in favor of Norma McCorvey. But you see, here's the thing. After that case was decided, McCorvey began to realize that dealing with the fallout of her actions was not good if she continued to be paralyzed by regret and despair. And so a few years later, she apologized for her actions, she repented of her sin, and she became a follower of Jesus Christ. You see, friends, ever since the beginning of the 1960s up until today, the percentage of Christians in the United States has continued to decrease except for the second half of the 1970s. It was the only time when the actual percentage of Christians in the U.S. actually increased. Because you see, for people like Chuck Colson, for people like George Wallace, for people like Norma McCorvey, they were tired of walking in the darkness. They were done with the excuses. They were done with the regret. They wanted to walk in the light and receive forgiveness and grace and peace. And friends, they found it in Jesus Christ.